Federal government tasked Nigerian Economic Summit Group to come with homegrown solutions to nation's economic challenges.
President Buhari to present 2020 appropriation bill to joint session of National Assembly today.
War against maritime insecurity in the Gulf of Guinea in focus as 2019 Global Maritime Security Conference holds in Abuja.
And on Good Morning Nigeria today, we shall discuss the performance evaluation of the 8th National Assembly.
They are active precisely because budgeting is an annual thing, but many other committees were not active. In fact, there are committees that have never met.
The legislature, as it is known, is the most significant symbol of democratic governance all over the world and is described as the second arm of government. Kinsley?
Legislature is saddled with the constitutional responsibilities of making laws for the peace, order, and good governance of the country, carrying out oversight functions as well as representation of constituents.
Exactly, Kinsley. Since the return of Nigeria to democratic rule in 1999, known as the Fourth Republic, there has been hue and cry by the electorate on the functions of the legislatures at the various tiers of government, that is, federal, state, and local governments.
Now, the general complaints include the perceived reputation of the legislators as being too concerned about their personal welfare, poor representation, and inadequate oversight.
And perhaps these allegations by the electorate prompted Center for Legislative Engagement to conduct an assessment of the performances of the 8th National Assembly, which spanned a period of 4 years between 2015 and 2019.
Now, the leadership of the 8th Assembly, as it is widely known, emerged through a controversy against what was also the expressed wish of the leadership of the governing party. And then there was also the attendant politics of legitimacy, frosty relations between the legislature and the executive from 2015 to June 2019.
Now, the Center, under the leadership of former INEC Chairman Professor Atahiru Jega, presented its report to the public with a number of observations and recommendations aimed at deepening democracy in Nigeria.
Now, the report, which is 114 pages, raised concerns over the long time in which bills were passed in the 8th National Assembly, and that, of course, those bills should ideally take less than 6 months.
So, how has the 8th National Assembly fared in the discharge of its constitutional mandate? What are the criteria adopted for the assessment, and what makes the 8th National Assembly unique for this time? To what extent did the legislature in question deliver on its mandate? How would the report correct the misconception of the public about the legislative arm of government? What recommendations are contained therein to chart alternative roadmaps for productive legislative governance in Nigeria? This is Good Morning Nigeria, the second for the week. I am Jumba Yusuf. Thanks so much for joining us.
We should also note that the report indicates very clearly that the 8th Assembly was very productive in terms of the number of bills that were considered and ultimately passed, including amendments to the Constitution. But my colleague Jumai has raised a number of pertinent issues, which our guests will respond to in our conversation segment on the program. My name is Kingsley Osadola. Good to have you join us on the program, live as always on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. As usual, to have our complimentary segments, and these include business, newspaper review, and others. In the meantime, let's join Lydia Odija Uchi for the morning news. Another wet morning, as it were, in the Federal Capital Territory. It's been a pretty wet year for us here in Abuja.
I just love the rain.
Well,
most of us slept today.
All right, Lydia, let's have the highlights of the news.
Thank you, Kingsley. Good morning, Jumai. Good morning, Nigeria, and here is the morning news. The federal government has tasked Nigerian Economic Summit Group to come up with productive, inventive, and innovative proposals to unlock the nation's potential for sustainable growth and development of the economy. President Muhammadu Buhari, who through the challenge expressed the belief that Nigeria's unique challenges can only be addressed by homegrown solutions. He was speaking at the opening of the 25th Nigerian Economic Summit in Abuja with the theme, Nigeria 2050, Shifting Gears.
Be solved by made in Nigeria solutions. As a government, our view is to equip our citizens with the means to seize any opportunities that may arise. This means continue investments in education, healthcare, infrastructure, security, and strengthen and entrench the rule of law.
For Nigeria to successfully cater for the needs of her rising population, the public and private sectors must synergize to ease the burden associated with the current population explosion, which is presently above economic growth in planning for the future. Building discussions around the theme, Nigeria 2050, Shifting Gears, panelists at the Nigeria Economic Summit proposed resolute determination in addressing issues relating to industrialization, education, and human capital development.
Asset are young people and our women. When we develop that strategy, we must cover that inclusiveness so that every one of us is put to work for this nation to achieve the goals that we set for 2050.
In my view, a massive program of basic education is at the heart of what we have to do in order to make.
President Muhammadu Buhari will today present the 2020 appropriation bill to a joint session of the National Assembly. This follows the conclusion of an extraordinary meeting of the Federal Executive Council on the nation's financial document. State House correspondent Adamu Sambo reports that the meeting presided over by the President considered and approved the general principles of the appropriation bill. Now, the new relationship that is geared towards unity of purpose among the executive and legislative arms of government is beginning to deepen. The Progressives Governors Forum, during a meeting with the leadership of the National Assembly, described the renewed relationship as inevitable for a sustainable national development.
And to appreciate the leadership of the National Assembly under both the chairman and the deputy chairman.
And we intend to remain very resolute. We intend to remain very loyal to the party and the principles the party stands for.
As in the House of Representatives, we have adopted a theme, nation building, a joint task.
So from the National Assembly, allegations of non-remittance of contributions to Nigerian Social Insurance Fund Trust by public and private organizations prompted the House of Representatives to carry out an investigation towards finding reasons behind what it calls an anomaly based on the fact that it provides social security for employees. National Assembly correspondent reports that the House expressed determination to know employers that are non-compliant for appropriate action.
Failure to comply with the requirement of the law in this matter is an act of sabotage against the interests of the Nigerian worker. And that is not something we can accept as a parliament.
Let us begin to show more compassion towards the fate of our workers, especially in their weakest moments.
Public awareness of the scheme has been relatively low, stemming mainly from confusion between the scheme and the pension scheme.
Away from the National Assembly now. Nigeria is leading African countries in the fight against maritime insecurity in the Gulf of Guinea. At the 2019 Global Maritime Security Conference in Abuja, key players advocate deeper global commitment to the deployment of resources towards ending insecurity in the region.
I firmly believe that the result of our efforts will foster better cooperation in addressing the challenges of maritime security in the Gulf of Guinea for the overall benefit of member states and the world at large.
Considering the security gains so far, the Nigerian Navy intends to consolidate current collaborative efforts, sustain fleet renewal, and expand its maritime awareness infrastructure.
And to our last report, Plateau State Governor Simon Bakula Long says his final term in office will be characterized by diligent and prudent utilization of resources that will change the living standards of the people of the state. Governor Lalong was speaking during the swearing-in of 23 commissioners at the Government House, Little Rayfield, Jos, where he charged them to see their appointment as a call to service and not an opportunity for self-enrichment. The governor said the people of Plateau State have reposed their confidence in the APC and the rescue team, and as such, all efforts must be made to justify the trust of the people.
Since I discourage every lobby and influence to personally select you, I am going to drive you so hard and hold you to the highest standards as you carry out your assignments to ensure we achieve tangible results. I therefore expect nothing less than loyalty, diligence, commitment, probity, and accountability to our development plans within the three-pillar policies of the administration.
And those are the news highlights for now. The program continues with Jumai and Kingsley after this break. Good morning.
The new edition of TV Guide is out, exclusively taking a look at the traditional television and new media. Are they comparable or complementary? Media industry players give perspective on the trends, progress, challenges, and the way forward. Find out on this compelling edition of TV Guide. Expository interviews with stars of the team within our space. Becky Madojemo of NTA, Utibe Umore of AIT, Nifemi Oguntai of TVC, and a host of others. TV Guide, your indispensable companion, also feature Iya Medina.
I'm the CEO, managing director of Iya Medina Sister Restaurant. I choose to serve. Shut up your mouth. Let me finish.
A TV drama series on NTA. Let's get to meet the characters behind Iya Medina. This edition also presents exciting features on tourism, culture, entertainment, sports, health, and lots more. Grab a copy at the vendors near you or any NTA station nationwide. TV Guide, your indispensable companion.
You don't reach 50 years now when that program they call village headmaster begin. None of the program now. That program when all of now they run, go home, go look for my television.
I want you now to formally tender your apology to Headmaster Ali for causing him so much embarrassment.
And 50 years now. So because of that, we won't get big party. I'm a body invite you now. And my belly just sweet. Because I don't say all those people they drink my palmy. Then go come drink the tombo again. And me, radio jam they call you now. They not forget.
What we are really cultivating here is a better future for all Nigerian women, and it's not always easy. Panadol Extra relieves headache, backache, joint pain, toothache, and menstrual pain. The pain is worth it.
Thanks for rejoining us. The ongoing 25th Nigerian Economic Summit is profiling solutions to Nigeria's economic challenges using the instrumentality of experts in the finance and economy field. Chimobi Walter in Nigeria is standing by with updates on some of these resolutions at the meeting.
All right, thank you very much, studio. Now, the Nigerian Economic Summit Group has entered the second day running, and a lot of issues are being raised here at the summit. And one of those issues really is on ways of ensuring that the macroeconomic growth in Nigeria is actually being taken to levels that Nigeria is expected to get at the shortest possible time. And of course, I have with me here one of the very passionate discussants. I'm talking of Mr. Charles Ivensa of the Lagos Business School. You can just give us a little update on how you think Nigeria can achieve this macroeconomic growth that we expect to see.
Yes, thank you very much. I think that growth will come from policy reforms. And for me, we really need to focus on solving the challenge of implementation of policies, solving the challenge of creating an environment that supports businesses, and take away the incentives for investors to come into this country.
It's Nigeria thinking towards what role, the NESG really, what role it should play in the AACFTA, that Nigeria has become signatory to, in ensuring that Nigeria doesn't become one, a dumping ground, and secondly, plays a high-level role in the African region.
Of course, there are things we must do to make a meaningful impact and to be to have a net positive gain in terms of ACTA, which is preparing our industries to be competitive. Because after open up the African market for us to take advantage of, but we need to be competitive in terms of infrastructure, in terms of the cost of production, in terms of the productivity of our workforce.
Here is a graphic representation of trading figures on the floor of the exchange. With business news, I'm Chimobi, Walter, Nigeria.
Many thanks, Chimobi, for the business package. Next for us on the program, take a look at the front pages of the papers we have this morning.
And Kisley?
That's right. Mr. Parry, Bayo Atepe is right here with us in the studios. Bayo, good morning and welcome.
Thank you, Kisley. Good morning. Good morning, John.
Good morning.
Good morning, Nigeria.
You caused the rain again this morning.
Yes, it really refused to go. This is October.
But it's Edwin and it's sweet.
Yes, it's good at least for the purpose of agriculture. However, the flood are coming. Ida is flooded, so also part of River State. Luckily, it is reducing in the far north.
Yes. It's not luckily, it's going to be very, very hot between now and November, December.
There was sufficient warning.
Yes.
We had discussions on...
To be forewarned is to be forearmed.
Yes, with regard to what was going to happen this year. But it looks like, I'm sure, by the time the aggregate figures are considered, we'll most likely find that for us in the Federal Capital Territory, this probably has been one of the wettest years in recent times. But let's take a look at the three papers, I believe.
The review with the Blueprint newspaper, just by the side of the Blueprint newspaper. Oshibajo off to Norway for Nordic African Business Summit. You find that on page 5. Leather industry makes $800 million annually. That's coming from the minister. You find that on page 4. Federal government approves $720 billion National Assembly increment on 2020 budget. With a rider, President presents proposal today. Now, 94 million Nigerians live below poverty line. That's coming from Oxfam. That's on page 3. And the bold headlines there, Buhari Few people in 5 states included holding Nigeria's wealth, which writers says our challenges require local solutions. Nation's democracy is maturing. You find that on page 6. And the picture story there, Governor Mala Buni of Yobe State, Nasir El-Rufai of Kaduna State, Kayode Fayami of Ekiti State, Aminu Bello Masari of Katsina State, and the Governor Babagana Umar Zulum standing there during a meeting of the APC governors and the leadership of the National Assembly in Abuja. Just below the picture story, why governors now afraid of organizing flamboyant parties. That's coming from Magu, the EFCC chairman. You find that on page 6. At the bottom plate of the Blueprint newspaper, BMO to Jonathan, confess, apologize to Nigerians over child girls. You find that on page 9. 6 for marks, Unilag suspends lecturer. That's on page 7. Border closure, I will improve economy. That's coming from Refund. You find that on page 5. And FG's re-strategizes against maritime insecurity. You find that on page 6. Kesley.
All right, let's take a look at this day newspaper. Incidentally, we have it today for review. This day newspaper, the lead story, let's go straight to the lead story, which is in the midsection of the front page. 2 months after, Sokoto, Zamfara, and Katsina count gains of amnesty for bandits. With 2 riders there, attacks subside. 477 hostages released, 218 guns, including AK-47, SMG, surrendered. Kaduna, others yet to implement deal. Once again, 2 months after, Sokoto, Zamfara, and Katsina count gains of amnesty for bandits. That's the list story. And then right below that headline, that is near the photograph on the front page and above the strip advert, Labour gives federal government and states October 31st ultimatum to pay new minimum wage. Details of that story can be found on page 8. And below the nameplate of this day newspaper, analysts back Buhari's call for homegrown solutions to Nigeria's challenges. Targeted reforms and tough decisions needed to fix economy, says Ahmed. That's the Minister of Finance, Budget and Planning, and that's the writer to that headline. Now, above the nameplate of this day newspaper, NAITI, that's the Transparency Initiative. It says metering can reduce volume of Nigeria's stolen oil. That's to be found on page 6. And above that, with 2 PSB licenses, that is Payment Service Bank licenses, telecommunication firms set to deepen CBN's financial inclusion. Bayo.
Well, let's start with the latest development. The Federal Executive Council closed from an extraordinary Executive Council meeting over the 2020 budget. The Council agreed to the adjustment made by the National Assembly over the medium-term expenditure framework. It has increased from 10.72 trillion to 10.02 trillion to 7.2 trillion. It means an increase of about 700 billion. The Federal Executive Council also appreciated the raising of the oil benchmark from $55 to 57. This is a positive indication about cooperation between the executive and the legislature. It's a departure from what you used to have in the past. The president is expected to lay the 2020 budget today before the joint session of the National Assembly. Expectations are high that with the early laying of the budget, all overtures towards getting the budget to return to January-December cycle will be attained. Also yesterday, the president addressed the 25th Nigerian Economic Summit, and the summit was told that the wealth of this nation is concentrated in the hands of a few. The president took the opportunity to make a distinction between wealth and prosperity, and he said wealth is money and other assets. When society is motivated by wealth, it provides a divided state of severe inequalities. However, prosperity is in a society where majority citizens have acceptable standard of living and decent quality of life. Therefore, the president proposed a situation of inclusion for all, so as that those below the level line of poverty can be raised. The Minister of Budget and Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning also raised critical issue at the summit, and she says that there is need for Nigeria to shift gears before 2050. We all are aware of the alarm that by 2050 Nigeria's population will reach about 400 billion. She said to have a robust and competitive posture, the economy must focus on the target of a population of 400 million. And she says that she foresees the future of a well-educated youth population in Nigeria that will create a workforce with skills in the future, including digital connectivity for the current industrial revolution of the 21st century. So there are positivities there, and the eggheads in the economy, both in the private and public sector, gathered yesterday to see how inclusion can be engendered in the economy to enhance the gross domestic product.
Okay, yeah, by those are the headlines that we have. We're going straight to the editorial. There is a story, it's on the front page of Blueprint, which Jumai read. This is Sex for Marks, the scandal involving a UNILAG lecturer and another lecturer at the University of Ghana. So that story is on the front page, but it's not on the front page of this day newspaper. I think it's a story that we have discussed in the past.
Yes.
And we are back again to this scandal of lecturers, sexual harassing their students. I'm sure you're familiar with the details of the story.
Yes, UNILAG has reacted. It doesn't condone such misconduct. And apparently, there's a room that was called the Gold Room. It is a room that is provided for at the staff club for purposes of meetings and seminars. And this was the venue where the undercover journalist who posed as a 17-year-old girl looking for admission was apparently exploited by the lecturer. The lecturer had demanded for a kiss. And she actually had interviewed several students, and they confirmed that there was such practices, and therefore the investigation is hampered on University of Lagos and University of Legon, Accra. But meanwhile, University of Lagos has suspended the lecturer concerned. He is barred from coming to the university academic area except when he comes to face the investigation panel. The lecturer, interestingly, is also a pastor of a church, and meanwhile, the church has also asked the minister to step down from ministerial assignments. The church says we do not condone such heinous and unscriptural acts among our ministers.
What happened in the cold room? They even have a room where this sort of thing.
The journalist got the information from the Randy lecturer who said, well, we have a place we call the cold room. And that is where we have to go and have a hard time. And then he took her there, and in the cold room was demanding the kiss.
You begin to wonder what female students go through just to get marks, and if you don't do it, you're done for.
Well, now, the interesting thing is that the First Lady of Ekiti State has also come out to say that she was also almost a victim, except that she was lucky she escaped. And she has raised it as a national concern now. And she says, as chairman of the Governor's Vice Forum, she's going to raise it at the national level. Don't forget that the professor of accounting is already accounting for his misbehavior with 2 years jail in prison. Also, ABU, just last week, also sacked a lecturer in one department who was also involved in such. So,
the professor of accounting was at Obafemi Awolowo University.
Yes.
That was a clear case because there was an audio recording of the professor openly demanding for sexual gratification.
5 rounds.
5 times.
Yes.
5 times,
Can
according to him.
And
that was a graduate student, by the way, an MBA. Yes, an MBA student on the occasion. What is not quite clear to me, I should admit that I haven't seen the full documentary, except for the 13-minute version of it that has been circulating, and parts of it, and then reports that I've also emanated from that. It appears at the University of Lagos, what happened is most likely similar to what played out some years ago. If you recall, there was an admission center at the University of Lagos. I think the teenager approached the lecturer, who was said to be an auxiliary staff or a part-time lecturer, and the lecturer, molested that young girl. I don't know what happened after that, because there were reports that, of course, he wasn't the staff of the University of Lagos, and the authorities were then going to prosecute him. Whether he was prosecuted and whether he's at Kirikiri at the moment or Ikoyi prison, it is not clear. It turns out that, in my reading of what has been reported so far, that perhaps, the encounter between the undercover reporter and the lecturer, who was said to have been the sub-dean at some point of the Faculty of Arts, talking about the code room at the staff club at the University of Lagos. So it's going from the code room now to hot water. It turns out that, okay, to the extent she was seeking admission, all right? It seems to be clumsy that you are seeking admission and then you are coming for tutorials. Tutorials for what? That's one leg of it. But it probably just reveals the behavior of that individual. It's possible that on account of preliminary investigation, the lecturer was tapped as being one of those tutorials for such acts. Why they seem to take advantage of female students is what remains baffling. And the fact that women are speaking out, and they should continue to speak out, is an important development that they've been tweaked. Talking about how some students, lost some years on account of the fact that they didn't succumb to this, and how some boys also suffered for it because the ladies claimed that XYZ was my boyfriend, so I couldn't therefore succumb to this. And I mean, it's part of what brings down the image of our institutions.
Exactly.
You remember yesterday we were talking about ASU? ASU has never faced this kind of issue squarely.
No. I think it's just my opinion. I think 2 years is just too little for a crime like that. There should be a list of sexual predators who abuse these girls or boys, and there should be a list so that when it happens next time, they know where to go to.
Even in the case of the OAU that we talked about, that the professor involved has been jailed, the initial reaction of ASU was to defend the professor.
Absolutely.
Until when the facts came into the public domain before they washed off their hands.
So after serving the 2 years, what next?
Well,
is he going back to his job?
No, he has been dismissed.
He's been fired.
Will he be employed again?
Well, whether he's employable will depend upon.
So many questions to ask.
That's right. Yeah, but sometimes you find videos of some of these lecturers who've been caught in hotel rooms, and been stripped, and it's been circulated. That tells you the quality and caliber of some of the persons we have in our academia.
Yeah. The one you are referring to happened in the Gwarimpa here, a lecturer of Abuja University.
Abuja University, yes. It's I remember the editorial is coming from Punch newspaper at page 22. Curb debt appetite. Curb. I was just going to say apartheid.
Are you hungry?
Curb debt appetite and seek investment. The editorial says, despite calls to curb its increasingly unnerving appetite for debt, the federal government's 3-year spending plan beginning 2020 envisages an additional 4.6 trillion naira borrowing. And of course, the editorial is indicating that the world has a debt problem, and external debt of developing nations rose to $7.8 trillion, according to the World Bank, with Nigeria contributing some 0.33% of this. But the country lacks the infrastructure and the long-term economic resilience to continue to take loans indiscriminately, especially for consumption or for politically motivated projects. Bayo.
Well, before I go to the editorial, can I quickly tell you that the police in Rivers State have killed the devil. The devil is a notorious kidnap kingpin, and police followed him into the forest. He is known to have harassed people in the Rivers and Imo State. And in the shootout with the police, he was killed. Some of his gang members also escaped with bullet wounds. And the Commissioner of Police for Rivers State has said that citizens must be ready to provide information, and they will take that on. Now, talking about the editorial now. The editorial is centering on borrowing. And the concern about borrowing is that Nigeria's level of borrowing is increasing, perhaps algebraically. Across the world, everywhere, nations borrow for purposes of development. Yes. And as it is now, Nigeria is said to have borrowed, but it was still within the safe range of below 24%. And therefore, it may be said that it is safe. However, such borrowing must be deployed for purposes of infrastructure for development so as to improve and enhance domestic growth, not for purposes of borrowing for consumption. Borrowing for consumption becomes very debilitating and undermines the economy. We had an instance that some couple of years back, we were borrowing to pay salaries. Luckily, we have scaled over that. If you are borrowing for infrastructure, and infrastructure will improve the economy, then such borrowing is likely to benefit the economy.
All right, Baya Toyebe, thank you for being around. We'll see you again tomorrow. Okay, it's Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. We're taking a short break now. When we return, we shall be discussing a report that is also an evaluation of the performance of the 8th Assembly 2015 to 2019.
They are there at the crack of dawn. They are there busy preparing while we rise for our day. They are there silently, guarding, waiting, listening, and watching. They are there ready in the sky above and the waters below, in the blistering heat of the day, in the dead of night, willing, indefatigable, determined in the defense of the sovereignty of our country. They are our first line of defense and our last. They who have paid the ultimate price in defending us. They are fathers and uncles. They are mothers and sisters and girlfriends and boyfriends. They are brothers and cousins and best friends and neighbors. They are classmates, colleagues, and citizens of this nation. They are our defenders and deserve our respect, our prayers, our thoughts. Nigeria, please support our armed forces.
The NTA ETV Annual Expo is here again. This time, it's the 13th edition with the theme Promoting Unity and Innovations in Youths as Agents of Change through Science and Arts. It promises to be captivating as youths across the nation showcase their unique skills and innovations in science and arts, make new friends, and showcase their rich cultural heritage. Join us at the ETA headquarters Arena Area 11 Garki, Abuja from Sunday 20th October to Thursday 24th October 2019. For more information, participation, and sponsorship, please call these numbers. NTA ETV, promoting learning.
If you're just joining us, this is Good Morning Nigeria. And to begin our discussion, let's take this report by Timothy Yusuf.
These are some of the bills of the 8th National Assembly assented to by the executive. This is in addition to the ones not assented to. The 8th National Assembly had prided itself as the best in the history of the nation's democracy in terms of bills and inputs that have facilitated good governance. Few months after it exited, Yaga Center for Legislative Engagement, after a comprehensive assessment of the performance of the 8th National Assembly, also thumbs up that legislature at a presentation of his scorecard of the 8th National Assembly. The findings of the study as presented by the lead researcher and former INEC chairman, Professor Tairu Jega, described it as remarkable and revealing with respect to lawmaking, which recorded significant increase in the number of bills. 2,166 bills were introduced, out of which 515 were passed, including 21 constitutional alteration bills, 5 of which received presidential assent. In all, the 8th Senate passed 172 bills, while the House of Representatives passed 343 bills within the same period. That seems to be the areas where the 8th National Assembly did well, as the report found it wanting in the areas of oversight functions and representation, with most members said not to be in touch with their constituents.
We looked at how committees of the National Assembly have performed, how active have they been. And we found that very few were really active. And the few that were active, in fact, the most active of them is the Appropriation Committee of the Senate and the House. But we also know that they are active precisely because budgeting is an annual thing, but many other committees were not active. In fact, there are committees that have never met.
We have to run an organized democracy, not just a democracy.
Because the way democracy is interpreted in Nigeria, all it means is that you conducted an election. That's democracy. But there's a difference between that and an organized democracy where people are educated and they understand the functions of each arm of government.
17 key recommendations cutting across the need for improvement in the quality of bills passed, adoption of electronic voting on bills and motions, legislative oversight, and openness and transparency in relations with citizens were made.
All right, thank you very much, Timothy Yusuf, for that background. We have with us here in the studios Dr. Ernest Ereke. He's a political scientist at the University of Abuja and also coordinator of the Center for Legislative Engagement. Dr. Ereke, pleasure to have you with us on the program this morning.
Thank you very much.
Also here with us in the studios, we'd like to welcome distinguished Senator Aliu Sabi Abdullahi. Is the Deputy Chief Whip of the 9th Senate. But in the 8th Senate, he was the spokesperson, the chairman of the Senate Committee on Media and Public Affairs. Distinguished Senator, pleasure to have you again on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you for having me.
All right.
And joining us from our Benin studio, we've been joined by Dr. Osawaru Okunzoa, Public Affairs Analyst. And here in our studios, yes, and also in our Abuja studio is Honorable Abdulrazak Namdas, Chairman, House Committee on Media and Public Affairs for the 8th House of Representatives, and he's also Chairman, House Committee on the Army. You're welcome to Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us.
All right, as my colleague said, from our Benin Network studio is Dr. Osawaru Okunzoa, Public Affairs Analyst, one of our regulars on Good Morning Nigeria. Let's begin with Dr. Ernest Ereke, who is a coordinator of the center that turned out this report, that is a performance evaluation of the 8th Assembly. Why did you focus on the 8th National Assembly? And what did you find? How did you find it?
Okay, thank you very much. We focused on the 8th Assembly for so many reasons. One is that we realized that when you give people assignments, you need to evaluate and find out to what extent did they deliver on the tasks that you have given them. And so Nigerians gave an assignment to the 8th National Assembly, as they have done to the previous assemblies, as well as this 9th Assembly. And we felt that it was only proper for us to evaluate the performance of this 8th Assembly. Now, one of the major reasons was because there is this impressionistic assessment that Nigerians have about the legislature. There is this perception that people have about the legislature in Nigeria, particularly the National Assembly. And so we felt that it was proper for us to have an empirical understanding of what the true position is as far as the National Assembly is concerned, instead of just relying on the usual stereotypes, instead of just relying on the usual misconceptions and misunderstandings that is out there in the public. We decided to go and conduct a research that will probably uphold some of those beliefs that Nigerians have about the National Assembly, or dispel those stereotypes. And so that was one of the reasons why we engaged in this research. And of course, the findings were revealing. We discovered, even though most Nigerians may not agree with some of the findings, but that is the product of research. You, the researcher, you can have your own belief, but when you go to the field, the findings from the field can dispel your own beliefs. And so we had some findings that are not really in tandem with some of the stereotypes and misconceptions that Nigerians have about the National Assembly.
For example?
For instance, we discovered, and this is not a popular finding, we discovered that in the area of oversight, for instance, in the area of lawmaking, for instance, the National Assembly does not really have adequate resources, as against the general belief outside there that the National Assembly takes so much of our resources. And when I talk about resources, we are talking about both financial and human resources. In terms of human resources is equally a product of financial resources, because if you are going to have quality bills, if you are going to have quality legislations, you require very good, capable, and competent team of experts who will be able to provide the data and conduct the research that you need in order to have a quality legislation. And these experts, these professionals do not come cheap. And so it is equally a product of resources. And so, of course, I know that this will not go down well with most Nigerians who believe that a lot of our resources, go into the National Assembly. But, of course, we also realized that one of the reasons why the National Assembly does not really, in addition to the inadequacy of resources, because the National Assembly also has too many committees. And so by the time you are able to service the needs of all the committees with the little resources you have, you will not be able to have quality legislation. As against when you have fewer committees, that you spend the little resources available for legislation, you have a better, you have a better legislation to turn out. But in this case, we have so many committees. Some of these committees exist just for political reasons and patronage. Now, we believe that if the National Assembly is able to streamline and trim down the number of committees in line with the little resources available to it for legislation, we'll have better legislation in the country.
Okay, we're still with you, but you talked about one misperception. That is to say, some Nigerians believe that, or many Nigerians believe that the National Assembly is awash with funds. But here you are, in terms of lawmaking duties and oversight function, the National Assembly is under-resourced. What other perception is out there that your research tried to focus on? Or indeed, what were the major thematic areas of your research, apart from what you just said about perception?
Okay, the major issues we looked at were the core areas of legislation. The National Assembly and the legislature all over the world is charged with three core assignments. One is legislation, the other is oversight, and then, of course, representation. In the area of representation, again, as against the general belief, we discovered that most members of the 8th Assembly did not really do well as a result of so many other reasons. Now, they are unable to visit their constituencies, hold meetings with their constituents, to hold town halls, to hold engagements, to have engagements with their constituents. One of the reasons that accounted for this was the fact that most constituents would rather be seeking for personal helps, issues ranging from payment of hospital bills, payment of school fees, and so many other issues that the legislature is not really saddled with. And so as a result of the fact that the legislators are not as well paid, because most Nigerians believe that Nigerian legislators are the best paid in the world, even without empirical data to prove that. And so as a result of the fact that these individuals are equally struggling to meet their own personal needs, most of them also stay away from their constituents. And so in the area of representation, they were not able really to impress as far as, relating with their constituents were concerned, because they realized that if you conduct town hall meetings, for instance, you have to pay transport fares for those who are coming, you have to provide entertainments and the rest for those who are coming. A lot of people will equally follow you to your houses. A recent experience, we followed a member of the House of Reps, provided technical support to a member of the House of Reps in Kebbi State, to conduct town halls in order to find out what the constituents want that can go into his legislative agenda. And it turned out chaotic, because most people who came for the engagement felt that the legislator was there to distribute money. In fact, they followed us all the way from Zuru to Sokoto State because they felt that he had a lot of money, to share for the constituents. And so most of these lawmakers run away from their constituencies and constituents because they do not have these resources to dispense. Again, we discovered that Nigerians have a poor understanding of the functions, the roles and responsibilities of the legislator. Nigerians believe that the legislator is there to construct roads. Nigerians believe that the legislator is there to, of course, pay school fees. They believe that the legislator is there to provide all the basic amenities. Now, we know that while the legislator is not saddled with these responsibilities, but it is equally the role and responsibility of the legislator to ensure that if funds are appropriated for the provision of some of these amenities that Nigerians, demand from them, that those funds are judiciously utilized for the provision of those amenities for which they have been appropriated. But it is not in the place of the legislator to begin to construct classrooms, to begin to construct roads, to begin to construct markets, as most persons believe that they should be doing.
Okay, Joma, I'm sorry that...
Yes.
but how did you then shake off the chasers from Zuru to Sokoto?
Because I just listened to you, and are you in any way trying to change the misconception of people about legislatures?
Yes, because this is a pioneering work in the area of assessing and understanding really what the legislator or legislature is doing. Like I said, there is this general misconception, and the reason is not far-fetched. The reason is because the legislature really can be regarded as the weakest link in our democracy, because over the years, in the days of the military rule, you will always have the executive in existence, you will always have the judiciary in existence. The legislature wasn't there. And so it was only since 1999, for 2 decades now, that we have really had the legislature in place. And so most Nigerians do not really understand the functions, the responsibilities, and the place of the legislature in our democracy. Really, it is the people's own house. It is the government that the people really can relate with. Most people cannot access their governors, but they can have access to their senators or to members of their House of Reps. And so there is this poor understanding that we also seek to help to dispel as far as understanding the legislature in Nigeria is concerned.
Okay, Dr. Oreke, thank you. You didn't answer the question of Zuru to Sokoto. Yes, maybe we'll leave that for later on in the program. All right, let's go over to Dr. Okunzuwa in our Benin Network Center. But Dr. Okunzuwa, public affairs analyst, are you surprised by what you're hearing from Dr. Ernest Oreke with regard to the outcome of their findings on the performance evaluation of the 8th Assembly?
I'm not surprised, and I wish to commend him and his colleagues for this study. It's a scientific approach to governance that has always been advocated by people. When the facts are known, then you don't start battling with interpretation. But the area where I would also agree with him completely is that Nigeria is a developing country. We know we are generally poor here. We know some other socio-economic indices are not in our favor. So in comparing things, we have to know the people we are serving, and it's their needs ultimately that should form the agenda of any government. Because if the government exists to serve the needs of the people, of course, we have to feel the pulse of the people from time to time. There was a time even during the military review talked about homegrown democracy and all of that. And I think that is one area where we should address the peculiarity of Nigerians. It is true that Nigeria has various needs, water and the rest of them, and the lawmakers are well positioned really to know these things on the spot basis, because they are supposed to be living amongst their people anyway before they became representatives. So the way we design our own government in Nigeria, or maybe a model for other developing countries, is to move away from textbook definitions of what the National Assembly should be doing. Nigeria as a country must be able to attune itself to its peculiarities. So very often constituency projects are a very wide tour for battles in Nigeria. A legislator in Nigeria can also serve or subserve the function of a social worker. By knowing the precise needs of his people, he is able to bring whatever he has to bring to the National Assembly, not just as a delegate of his constituency, but also a trustee of the nation for that period of his National Assembly. So it's a good thing he has told us what he found in his research, commendable, scientific, but for me what it tells me is that our form of government must be attuned to the peculiarity of our people.
Exactly. You know, he spoke about lack of resources for inadequate resources for the 8th Assembly, high rate of legislative turnover, and tension between the legislative and the executive. Do you think that these are challenges that could have affected their functions?
Well, I wouldn't think so. He mentioned another point, the relative infancy of the National Assembly as a coordinate arm of government. It is true that it will take time for the National Assembly to catch up with the other arms of government on account of interruptions they have suffered in the course of our political evolution. But that notwithstanding, the issue of perception, the way Nigerians see our national lawmakers, that needs to change. And the lawmakers themselves need to position themselves to acquire more credibility, because with credibility will come trust. And with trust will come the resources they need to do the work they need to do. As a matter of fact, the National Assembly, apart from being the symbol of our democracy, that's supposed to be the engine room for veritable national discourse. And today, when affairs of the world and kind of flaws, if not too much, it's the National Assembly that will actually devise our laws to make sure we are modernized, to regulate our technology, our way of organizing society, and so on and so forth. So definitely, we need to allocate more resources to the National Assembly. We also need to make sure that men and women of caliber and competence are the people who are there in the National Assembly to represent different constituencies in Nigeria.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Okunzo Asawa. We'll return to you in the course of the conversation. Now, back to the studios here in Abuja. We, of course, have Senator Sabi Abdullahi and Honorable Namdas. Gentlemen, over the course of the 8th National Assembly, we have you on Good Morning Nigeria on several occasions. Just one aspect of the report that we're talking about now, and that has to do with public perception of the National Assembly. Are you surprised by the outcome of the findings? Because you were both perception managers, as it were, of the 8th Assembly.
Well, thank you very much, Kingsley, for having me. First, let me commend Dr. Ernest and Professor Jiga and all the team members. This is a very, very important milestone in our democracy. And to me, it shows clearly that when Nigerians decide to do the needful, I think there is no stopping them. And I commend them and the funders of this particular research. And I hope that they will continue to go on and on to look at all of these issues. Perhaps they've looked at the National Assembly. It's important they now begin to go down to look at the state and then also begin to look at even the local government. Because I remember in those days of the military, even in the local government, the councils, those councillors, they were so powerful. They had, they were able to really put the chairman in check. But all of this now has collapsed. Now, having said this, for me, today is a day of joy. Because not
yet, you haven't heard.
No, it's a day of joy. You know why? Because we now have helpers. We are saddled with the responsibility of trying to explain to Nigerians the workings of the National Assembly. But of course, perhaps because we are participant observant ourselves, they never believed us. Today, we have an independent body coming to say what we have said for 4 years in different forms. I think that is a very beautiful thing to note, and it gladdens my heart. And I know for sure, like I have always said in the past, that we are looking at the National Assembly as an institution. When I was the spokesperson, I always maintained my position that I'm speaking on behalf of the 109 senators, of which I'm one. And I'm looking at it from an institutional perspective. Now, the other point is, in every organization, the moment there is no learning, there can be growth. The moment people don't really sit down to evaluate situation, assess, and come out with some learning point, then there is a problem. When I was in the public service, I was involved in monitoring and evaluation. And monitoring and evaluation has now been turned into monitoring and evaluation and learning. Because you must not leave that particular aspect. And learning takes a deep reflection. And I think what this research has done is to really go deep, scientifically, to bring out all the nuances and all the key issues that has shaped what the legislature is. And it's it's a welcome development that we have this. I will hope that the research report will be given wider circulations and perhaps produce in languages that Nigerians can access, so that it will be available to so many Nigerians to understand, because there are many components of our constituents who do not understand perhaps the language of the research. But having said this also, let me say that we are learning, and the learning point surely will help what the Ninth Assembly will be doing.
Okay, coming to that, the report appreciated the increase in the number of bills passed by the 8th Assembly.
I was just wondering, Joma, just before we get into the nitty-gritty of the number of bills, because Erike will speak to details, still perception management. He has spoken for the Senate. Honorable Namdas was the spokesperson for the 8th Assembly. Are you surprised by the report? I keep asking that question in this conversation. Are you surprised, or are you...
Maybe it's a joyful day for him too.
Yeah, I think, let me join my colleague to say that we all thank this NGO that undertook this research. Let me be clear. I'm so happy that it happened in this manner. Assuming this report was coming from the legislators, people will tune off their radio, the TV stations. They don't even like to listen to it, because anything we say all the time is like you are blowing your own trumpet. You are trying to cover all these things you are doing. The National Assembly is method of secrecy. You don't expose it. It's too like that. And we keep saying the business of lawmaking is capital intensive. It's not as if we are building houses or constructing roads. The truth is this: for you to have good legislation, you need a very excellent legislator, and who will have the capacity to sponsor a particular bill or motion. And that is not a one-man affair. In developed nations, there is fund that is reserved for legislators. Their aides undertake serious researches. If, for example, I keep saying it, assuming I'm an expert in an area of engineering, and tomorrow something comes up that is not in the area of engineering, I can't be an expert in all spheres of life. I need an expert to help me. So you source consultants. You get people who are very expert in this, draft this bill for you, explain it to you, and it costs money. Ordinarily, let me tell you what people understand. If you go to election petition tribunals, go and just get a service of an AM to start for you in a court, and just listen to the kind of money he will mention it to you: 50 million, 100 million. Now, this is for how many months? 180 days in the law tribunal and how many days in the upper court? We are talking of a legislature that will last for 4 years. And he is supposed to develop a law for governance that you and me will benefit from. So it's not about how expensive. In fact, it is not in our interest to have any law that is not well couched and not well presented. Once that law passes and it becomes a problem, then you can imagine the cost it will come with it. Because this law will not be good, and the side effect will even cost more money than when the money was passed through. So for me, I think it's good. And I want to also draw the attention of Nigerians. Even when we had on the floor of the House, we were commissioning, during the inauguration of the committees of the Ninth Assembly. In the House of Representatives, we invited speakers. And in fact, the former DG of Nigerian Institute of Legislative Studies came forward to say, look, that this National Assembly is underfunded. She said it's on record. That's underfunded. It's not coming from us. And it's important that Nigeria should know that actually why is it so? So by the time people get to know that we are underfunded, not because of legislators alone, but because of the duties and even capacity development. Before I land, let me tell you that even our clerks who are seasoned civil servants, some of them have been there for the past 20 years, 25 years, we even learn from them. They too need to be trained, not legislators alone, because they play a vital role. Like I'm a chairman committee on clerk, on army. I have in my clerk who has been there before. So naturally, no matter the experience I have to listen to this clerk. to get to know what is happening before I get to other people. And therefore, if you don't even train these clerks, it would even affect the quality of job in the National Assembly. So it's very capital intensive.
Thank you so much. Dr. Ereke, you know, they've all talked about the prison reports they got from you. So can we talk about the other aspect of the report, you said?
Okay, fine. Yes, we have said that we found out that the 8th Assembly has been the most productive since 1999 or in the history of legislation in the country, especially because about 2,166 bills were introduced in the 8th National Assembly, out of which, as your reporter pointed out of which 515 were passed, and some of them, got assent from the president. But if you look at the percentage, only about 15.5%, was assented to as a result of different reasons and issues, but particularly as a result of the quality of those bills. Some of those bills were not really scrutinized before they were passed. In fact, we had a situation where constitution alteration bills, the two chambers passed two different versions, and there was no proper reconciliation of the provisions and the alterations that the two chambers made. And so the quality of those bills, even though the legislators were very productive in the area of bills and legislation, but the quality of the bills equally matters. Again, if you look at the kind of bills that were introduced, they were basically or mostly establishment bills. Nearly every member of the House or of the Senate wanted either a college of education or a university or a polytechnic in his or her constituency. And so when you look at the kind of bills, the quality of the bills, the nature of the bills, you discover that a lot still has to be done. And that is why we titled this research an assessment of the 8th Assembly and lessons for the 9th Assembly, so that the 9th Assembly will see areas where the 8th Assembly excelled and build on that, and also see where the 8th Assembly failed and avoid those pitfalls. And so if you look at, again, the area of private member bills, you discover that the 8th Assembly was highly productive as far as private member bills were concerned, because out of the 2,166, 95.8% of the total bills introduced were private member bills, which shows that the individual legislators were very productive in the 8th Assembly. But again, the other angle that we must look at is, why were they that productive? They were productive for some reasons which I will mention. One, because we have had 2 decades of unbroken legislation in the country, and so we have had legislators who have been in the assembly for quite some time. They have learnt over the years, because their capacities have been built over the years, and so they have learned from experience, and so they were able to introduce legislations. Again, some of those bills some of those private member bills were bills that were sponsored by civil society organizations and other professional bodies. For instance, the Not Too Young to Run bill was sponsored by Yaga Africa, but through individual members of the National Assembly. But again, it also underscores the fact that the 8th Assembly was somewhat citizens participatory, because if citizens did not have access to members to push through some of the bills and legislations that they were interested in, those legislations wouldn't have come up on the floor of the National Assembly. So to that extent, you can say that the legislature, the 8th Assembly, was participatory in terms of legislation. But if you also look at so many other things, for instance, how inclusive were some of those legislations? Some of them, if you go deeper into the study, you will discover that only about 14.5% or thereabout felt that the bills were inclusive. Some of the bills considered to be inclusive in nature, the disability bill, the Not Too Young to Run bill again. But overall, if you look at citizens' input into legislation, you'll discover that public hearing, committee hearings are not really, we don't have a robust public hearing system. But again, it has to do with funding of the committees. It also has to do with our own understanding of what the legislature is doing. So if you consider all of this, it is a mixed performance for the 8th Assembly. Some areas they did very well, but in some other areas they didn't do so well as a result of certain challenges which are institutional, and of course some of which the National Assembly brought upon itself.
Namely?
Okay, namely, I mentioned earlier the high number of committees that the National Assembly has. These committees sometimes have overlapping functions. Like I said, some of these committees exist just for political reasons and patronage.
In your report, you said some of these committees were duplicated.
Exactly. Some of them were duplicated, so they had overlapping functions. We even discovered a situation where some committees, especially when you consider the fact that some committees have Jews and some committees do not have Jews. The language of the National Assembly that some committees...
The language of the public.
Okay, there are some committees that people feel are juicy, and there are some committees they feel are not juicy. And so some of these committees didn't meet throughout. If you look at a legislative year, some of them didn't meet. And so we categorize these committees into active, moderately active, and then inactive. A good number of them were inactive. Some of them were active. For instance, of course, as expected, the appropriation committee of the two chambers were very, very active. The ethics and privileges were active. Of course, yes.
Yes.
And then if you look at youth development, the committee of women and social development, they were active.
Okay, Dr. Reke, thank you very much. I mean, two issues on the table now. One has to do with the productivity of the Assembly as a whole in terms of the quantum of bills and the quality of the bills passed, and then the other breaking it down now to functions and how active or otherwise they are. Let's raise the issue of the prolific nature of the 8th Assembly with regard to the quantum of bills passed and then the quality of those bills as indicated in your report. Dr. Osawaro Okunzuwa, what is your comment on what we are learning from this report?
Confess it to you, as a citizen, I'm also very happy about the report given about the 8th National Assembly. It's not a perfect report, but it shows there is a lot of movement upwards. If the 8th National Assembly is deemed better than the sessions that came before it, it means the Nigerian National Assembly is making progress. So whatever porous areas we have, we probably have to invest in plugging them and so on and so forth. Now the capacity to generate bills, however imperfect the bills have become, tells us that the National Assembly does have an idea of what it should be doing. And then, of course, we have to improve the quality as well over time. And then the issue is raised about their constraints, issue of manpower, issue of finance, and so on. Those issues you have to look into, of course, within the constraints of our national situation. How do they borrow people? We have a lot of universities. This one is a very good investment now. The political scientists have done this. Maybe other social scientists can also lend a hand in that regard. Maybe all the resources don't have to be appropriated to the National Assembly. They can borrow. We have a lot of research institutes. We have a lot of universities, as I said before. So I think it's a lot of progress. Why we are not there yet is a lot of improvement to be celebrated that the 8th National Assembly was better than previous ones. And it is to be hoped that the 9th one will also outdo the 8th National Assembly. And when that continues, that will be an encouraging trend that our democracy will endure after all.
I was just wondering, Dr. Osawa, you've made a very valid point now, of course, in addition to the points you made earlier, that namely the National Assembly could seek resources from the many institutes that we have in the country. A number of those institutes are virtually lying idle. But would that also not deal with the issue of resource allocation? Because well, the issue of public perception is not broken down yet for us to clearly understand. Some persons would argue if you're going to spend saying the 9th Assembly, since they are already learning lessons from 8th Assembly, they say they will spend 5.5 billion, to buy jeeps and SUVs. They could appropriate a little bit of that to say, let's get consultants from the institutes. Dr. Sawari, what do you think?
I couldn't agree more with you on that regard. You see, when we are talking about national affairs, all national resources from wherever corner of the country can actually be pressed into service. So it doesn't have to be, even a serious PhD student can generate a thesis that will be useful to National Assembly. So in that regard, we are talking about what even the NUC is doing and so on. We are all trying to make the nation run well for the benefit of all our citizens. So the resources don't have to belong to National Assembly. For as long as the resources belong to the nation at all, the resources should be made available to the National Assembly. So National Assembly itself should also look outwards, seeking what Nigerians are thinking, seeking what universities, the institutes, even international bodies, for as long as their ideas are useful to us and we can borrow freely or as a token fee from them, they can be useful. We don't have to pay for these things directly ourselves. So it's a way of curing the constraints. I'm suggesting the constraints the National Assembly is laboring under. So, but for now, they seem to have an idea of their function. So it's actually now to strengthen their hands to make sure they can carry on this thing qualitatively and with a lot of productivity. I think, going by this report, any citizen should satisfy the National Assembly is on course, and we have to wish them well to do better.
Thank you so much. Back in the studios, Senator Aliu, coming to you. This report has sort of vindicated the 8th Assembly. A lot of bills were passed, but a lot of bills were killed too. 33 in number. What happened? And the delay in passing these bills?
Well, I think the point that must be made at this point is for us to acknowledge the fact that the 8th National Assembly was not crisis-free. There was so much politics. And I think at the end of the day, it shows clearly that word politics, what it's supposed to be doing, and the meaning we have given to it. I'm happy as a political scientist that have actually gone ahead to show the way in terms of what should be done. And my take is that because of the politics, it turned out to be that there was no proper engagement between the National Assembly and the executive side. Some of the issue of the quality of the bills he talked about. In every bill that Mr. President declined assent, he sent a letter to the National Assembly. And many of them were just editorial. And so for us, our take is that having spent so much money to get to the passage of a bill, perhaps if the relationship was that very smoothing and good, some of these things could have actually been resolved. And so to my mind, as much as I've not read the details of the report, I think the question of the quality of the bills itself is something that we can look at. I knew for a fact that there were so many good bills, but the politics of the 8th Assembly vis-a-vis the relationship with the executive contributed in no small way in actually killing those particular bills. And let me say that when they said lessons for the 9th Assembly, I'm so happy about that, because for us who are fortunate to have been back in the 9th Assembly, that explains why from the outside we took it upon ourselves to say, look, we are not waiting for anybody to tell us what to do. We knew what happened in the last Assembly. We want to get our leadership recruitment this time around perfectly well, and to God be the glory, the 9th Assembly appears very steady, very stable, and so far so good. We are almost always going back to look at the mistakes that have been made in the last Assembly and areas where we can improve. And I think I must make a point here, for example. The last Assembly, actually all the two chambers had legislative agenda. And the legislative agenda guided us very well in achieving the results that they have talked about, even though I have not seen the extent to which they have linked the presence of a legislative agenda to the output. Now, this 9th Assembly also, both chambers have a legislative agenda. We've already, at least talked about our own in chamber, and the legislative agenda is meant to be a frame to guide us in how to proceed. Now, the other point I would like to make is that the issue of the committees they have talked about. For the legislature...
I'm sorry, just before we get into issue of committees, since we're still dealing with the quantum of bills, let's bring in Honorable Namdas here. In your opinion, what were the critical success factors in the number of bills churned out by the 8th Assembly, notwithstanding some of the drawbacks relating to the quality and rejection by the executive branch?
Yeah, thank you so much. For instance, I remember the leadership of the 8th Assembly, particularly House of Representatives, set up a committee that was made up of eminent jurists, scholars, to review existing laws and see whether we have to repeal some, amend some, and reintroduce some. And I remember on a single day, we introduced 130 bills for first reading, because that committee did a very good job. It included even the members of the civil society organizations. We reviewed some of these laws have been there since military institutions, and they are archaic. And some would even tell you of punishment that you should pay 2 naira, 10 naira, 5 naira, the punitive measures. And it encourages people to say, okay, if that is the punitive measure is to pay 10,000 or 5,000, okay, I will just go ahead and do the thing. I can just issue my check and pay, or dip my hand inside my pocket. I'm giving an example. So we had those bills. So it was part of the reasons that I think the number of bills were actually very high. And I want to link up to what he said about the relationship between the executive actually and the legislature was not very good. And I can give you an example. It affected a very critical bill in the 8th Assembly, and talked about petroleum PIB bill. The leadership of the 8th Assembly did its best to say, okay, call on the executive, can you please introduce an executive bill in respect of PIB? Let's see your own intentions so that we can work on it. We waited so long, it didn't come. So the leadership of the 8th Assembly decided it was a private member bill that came forth, and public hearings were made, and I remember it was even subdivided into 4 bills. There was host community bills, administration bills, all to cater for the issue, so that since crude oil is one of the major foreign exchange for Nigeria, we felt that this should be sorted out. If you are able to sort out this, but after it was passed, it was not actually assented to. So you see, imagine if we had, like in the 9th Assembly, I can assure you, we have our leaders that I think we desired, and fortunately we got those leaders, and they have a very good relationship with the executive. And assuming this thing happened in the 9th Assembly, I can tell you that it would have also been assented to.
Will it be reintroduced, some of these bills that
we have already reintroduced most of them, because that's the only way we can have a succeeding National Assembly. And today, the President, by the special grace of God, is going to lay the budget by 2 o'clock in the joint sitting of the National Assembly. But one good thing to link up again is that before this budget, our leaders had a very robust discussion with the executive. So we have an idea what is even coming. Our committees on finance, loans, and what have you have discussed with the executive. So you can see the speed with which this thing will go will not be like it happened in the last.
Sorry, just one point, please. Yes. I think in line with what you said, for example, the petroleum sharing, the PSR, the PSC, they call it production sharing contract. Yeah. This is the Deep Offshore, Act, which says when the cost of petroleum, the crude, goes beyond $20, there is something that must be done. Now, that particular provision has denied Nigeria enormous amount of money, which will have come into the national coffers to help us budget it. Now, as far as this is concerned, right now as we speak, because of this, new understanding, learning from what has transpired in the past, the PSC has already been produced, and we are hoping by next week we are going to take the second reading. And in the next 1 month, we hope to conclude it so that side by side with the passage of the 2020 appropriation, the PSC should also be assented to. And all of this is coming on the heels of a robust, engagement with the executive side.
Okay, Senator Sabi, thank you very much. I mean, we recall that the PSC issue was some hot item during the 8th Assembly.
Yeah.
When it first came to public knowledge that Nigeria had been shortchanged, you know, by the partners in the PSC standing for production sharing contract. So we'll see how the terms of the new piece of legislation will work out once it comes out. But back to Dr. Ernest Oreke. While the two spokesmen of the 8th Assembly were responding to your findings, they also raised the issue of the critical success factor, namely the fact that they had a framework that was Christian legislative agenda. I recall that we discussed that here in 2015 on Good Morning Nigeria when they came, and of course when the economy went into a recession, they also had their own responses. Did your report try to focus on say, look, this was the agenda they gave to themselves, and this is how far they have gone in terms of trying to meet the particular items on the agenda, notwithstanding adversarial politics that played out between the executive and the legislature?
Okay, thank you very much. First, I think I will quickly clarify that this is not because the perception is that it is a research that I conducted myself. It will amount to intellectual theft to claim responsibility for this. This research was commissioned by Yaga Africa's Center for Legislative Engagement, and the center recruited eminent scholars led by no less a person than Professor Tahiru Jega. So it is not my intellectual property. I think I should clarify that. And in terms of the methodology, we got, and that is why this is very, very scientific, we got data from secondary and primary sources. And then, of course, when you talk about secondary sources, our secondary sources came from extant literature, including sessional reports of committees, including the legislative agenda of the two chambers of the National Assembly, as well as works done from the Hansards of the National Assembly and works done by scholars who are interested in the legislature. And then, of course, we went to the field where we interviewed about 2,910 respondents across the country, including the leadership of the 8th Assembly, because we conducted an in-depth interview with the then Senate leadership and some committee chairmen of the National Assembly. And so that is why we can say that this report is a scientific, its findings are scientific, and we can challenge anybody to conduct similar research, and that is what science is all about. My findings should be able to be tested by another researcher who does the same thing. Now, if you do the same thing, you will find out that you are going to have similar findings. And so, for instance, if you look at the number of bills that we have been mentioning, the 7th Assembly had about 1,367 bills introduced, out of which they only managed to pass about 205. When you compare that to the volume of bills in the 8th Assembly, which we have mentioned was 2,166, out of which they passed 515. These are facts that cannot be controverted. So the reports, of course, made references to all of those literature, including the agenda that the distinguished senator has talked about.
All right, gentlemen, it's still on the conversation with regard to the performance evaluation of the 8th National Assembly. We're going to take a short break now. When we return, we'll continue with the conversation.
Move now! The red light won't kill you. Move now!
To they disobey traffic law, they cause accidents. Me, I don't talk, say, I no go dey do am again, because change begins with me.
I will no longer endanger my life crossing the express. Instead, I will use the bridge, because change begins with me.
Oga driver, stop this bus now, won't come down. I be one carry me past where they go.
Make I dey stop anyhow for road, they cause traffic wahala and accidents. So I go dey stop for the right bus stop, because change begins with me.
Change begins with me.
This
brought to you by the National Orientation Agency in conjunction with the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
Thanks for rejoining us. Now, Senator Aliu Sabi, let's talk about the committees. How they come together to, pass these bills. What happens behind the scene? Most Nigerians are not aware. They just see you on the floor, you talk. They don't know that behind all these television razzmatazz, there's a lot of work in the committee sector.
Well, thank you very much. As we have always said, in the National Assembly, the committees are the engine room through which everything we do is processed. And it's very important that we understand the workings of the committee. And as much as possible, there has been this debate, just like the researchers have noted, between having a slimmer committee and maybe the large number of committee in quote that we talked about. The issues are very clear. If you look at the committees are designed to address the entire federation, designed to address the entire economy, designed to address the entire social milieu of Nigeria. And so within that context, what we have even found is that some of the mandates that a particular committee have, because of the quantum of work they have, sometimes they are not able to address some other elements. And I think this is where we normally find ourselves wanting to really say, look, this issue is under attended to, so let's try to break this particular committee. Yes, I agree the issue of patronage might be there. After all, we are politicians, and everybody wants to find himself engaged in doing why exactly he's in the National Assembly. But let me make one point, for example. If you look at the upstream, for example, that is where we remove the local content. And the local content as an issue is something we realize that the upstream is not able to pay so much attention on. And that is why from the House, for example, they removed the local content. In the 7th Assembly, they had local content. So by the time we got into the 8th Assembly, initially we don't have local content. But at the end, realizing that there is weakness, local content committee was introduced. And today, because of the work, the last 2 years, when the Senate actually had a local content committee, because of the work done, we now realize that while we are focusing on the oil and gas, the area of construction industry, for example, is supposed to be a huge local content there, but it's not attended to. So this is why we find ourselves having this number of committees. But the point I want to make here is that at the end of the day, when you say public hearing, it's the committees that will take referrals when motions are taken or when second readings of a bill are taken, so that issues are referred to them to go and have public hearing, write reports, and come back. In fact, let me tell you, there are some committees you have to start chasing them, and they have so much work to do. Like my colleague said earlier, the management or the what did they call it, bureaucracy of the National Assembly, sometimes they are also overwhelmed. They need to be trained, and sometimes they don't get the right training. They need some skills, they don't have the right skills. So we find ourselves grappling, struggling at all times to make sure that reports are out. And when these reports are out, of course, you bring it to the plenary. And now in plenary, because of the multiplicity of expertise, you may get some people who will even, criticize and debate on the, report to the extent that you may have to stand down that particular report for further legislative work. So this is the beauty of the committee. And what I think we need to do is to find a way. In fact, the leadership of the 9th Assembly, for example, is upbeat in terms of strengthening the committees. And it is the committees also that do the oversight. Oversight involves looking through what the ministries, departments, and agencies are doing, sometimes visiting, and all of this thing takes a lot of time. And when you juxtapose this with the representative responsibility of the politicians, it can be a very tough work.
Honorable Namdas.
Yes, I think to add, in the House of Representatives in the 8th Assembly, we had about 96 committees. In the 9th Assembly, we have about 105 committees. Let me explain why this is so. In developed countries, where the democracy is uninterrupted. Like you go to years, you have over 200 years of democracy. You may just have less than 10 committees, for example, because they have developed over time and no interruptions. So you call on somebody, if you want to talk on energy, they will ask you to meet X. You want to talk on foreign affairs, you go and talk to Biden. He will tell you that he is an expert in the area of foreign affairs. He has been there for over 20 years, 30 years. So this has been, but in Nigeria, as he mentioned, it has to do with the entire country. And for us as developing nations and developing democracy, we have to find a way of adequately oversighting this institution. For example, in the area of education, we have in the House of Representatives, Committee on Basic Education and Committee on Higher Education. If you are to allow just a single committee to handle education, which includes both basic and higher education, it could be too challenging, the task could be too enormous. If you come to the issue of interior in the House of in the State Assembly, all oversees the likes of immigration, prisons, civil defense, all this apart. But now in the Night Assembly, we have even made prisons as an independent entity, as a committee, so that
it's not correctional services.
Correctional services, sorry, yeah, correctional services. Right. It's a committee of its own, so that it will give the legislature the adequate time to pursue. And as he said, this one people see us on the floor of the House bringing motions and bills is just 30% of the job. 70% of the job is done by these committees, because when motions are passed, far as he said, are made to the committees, and these committees will also handle this and then begin to tidy up during public hearings and then come back with it on the floor of the House for the third reading. So, and it requires a lot of exercise. I think we are getting it right. Even when I was chairing committee on media, some people think that I'm the one oversighting NTA, not knowing that we have committee on information that oversights NBC, NTA, other, if ever. So you can see the job. I think it was done. It's done with good intention.
I just want to ask this before we go to Dr. Osawa Okunzua, because the issue came up on Good Morning Nigeria some weeks ago when we were discussing the management of border communities. I did remark while posing a question that I wasn't certain whether the National Assembly has a committee on border communities, because our border communities are neglected and they are the cause and source of the challenges that we are facing with our borders, which is what has led to the partial closure of our land borders. Senator, do we have a committee on border?
Yeah, there is a committee that oversees border community. That is the Committee on Local Government, State and Local Government and Intergovernmental Affairs. The issue is that the Border Community Development Agency is under the presidency, and the actions or what they do there is considered to be intergovernmental. I think that is why the Committee on Intergovernmental and state and local governments are the ones that oversee that in the Senate, for example.
In the House of Representatives, we have Committee on Special Duties that handles the issue of border matters. We have the agency that's in charge of border communities is oversighted by the Special Duties Committee. I was a member of that committee in the 8th Assembly. I remember we went to all this Calabar, this
Cameroon
Bakassi issue, so that you look at developments within these border communities. By the time you don't give them the necessary infrastructure, you'll find that the Cameroonians will be coming over to take over, and if you don't have it in Nigeria, the Nigerians will go to Cameroon where they have. So it was a sort of a problem, so we had to look at that.
Well, the problem is much larger now. We hope the Ninth Assembly will take a look at that, because we had here the Comptroller General of Immigration, we had the retired Assistant Comptroller General of Immigration, and several experts on border issues. And what they talked about is the aggravation of the circumstance. So let's move on. We hope that maybe the Ninth Assembly will also take a look at having the committee on code room, as we are seeing at the University of Lagos. Let's go over to Dr.
Sorry.
Code room, is that what you want to talk about?
No, sorry, just one point.
All right.
You remember in the 8th Assembly, we actually had a bill on sexual harassment.
That's right. Prescribing 5 years.
Yes,
or so.
and I think at that time, honestly, like I said, because of too much politics, many people just bastardized the entire intendment, and that issue has refused to go. It's still with us.
So that's a code room bill now. It must come back. All right, so let's go over to Dr. Osawaru Okunzua, who is in our Benin Network Center. Dr. Osawaru, well, you've listened to the other guests. We're now talking about the efficacy of our committee system, their sheer number, and of course the developmental challenges that they have to address. What is your take? Because it's the engine room, but obviously from the report that Dr. Erike indicated, some of those committees had their engines knocked, as we say, at the mechanic workshop.
It didn't even start.
Well, I think it would be difficult to state an optimum number of committees. It is the affairs they have to attend to, the resources available, and will determine the kind of committees they should have. And for me, for as long as the span of control is not challenged, we can have as many committees as possible. Nigeria is a very vast country. We have a lot of issues to talk about, a lot of issues to work on. And if any issue can receive the attention of the National Assembly, it should be a blessing to all Nigerians. So as many committees as we can have, as many committees as we can support, for as long as those committees are given the tools to work with, seriously. That is going to be my own standpoint. So the mistake we often make too when we try and transport some model, especially from the private sector, about efficiency, streamlining things and so on, that should not be the work of National Assembly. National Assembly is there to serve national purpose in conjunction with other national institutions. So how they are going to do it, so long as they mobilize the resources to do it, that is what Nigerians should be interested in. Not how neat or how streamlined the number of committees is. So we just want them, as an institution of the country, a very vital one as that, to lead the way, to be forward-looking, to be competent to solve the problems of Nigerians, so that Nigerians can live better lives and be able to relate with other parts of the world freely as citizens of Nigeria and citizens of the world.
Okay, Dr. Sawaru, thank you very much. Very quickly, we would like to indicate that we have a number of tweets. But of course, we needed to deal with the details of the report and then get the comments of our guests, including the lawmakers who were spokesperson for the 8th Assembly. Let's go over the tweets very quickly now. Festus Akimboewa has this tweet. It says the 8th National Assembly did well by passing many bills, but many of the bills lacked quality and were littered with drafting errors. That's why President Buhari declined assent to some of the bills. The 9th Assembly must learn lessons from where the 8th Assembly failed.
And Sani Marke Omokoji tweets, from the record, 8th Assembly has passed more bills and at the same time rejected more bills than any other assembly in the past. One bill that is dear to Nigerians, the Not Young to Run bill that was passed into law, not emphasizing the rift with the executive. Kudos to the 8th Assembly.
Rogbala Humbabs, as successful as the 8th Assembly proved to be, its shenanigans in terms of needless delays and budget padding were its greatest undoing. Aside this was the avoidable politicking that characterized the relationship between the executive and the legislature.
And Joseph tweets, is it the 8th or 9th? The 8th Assembly is the worst and rebellious assembly in Nigeria. From the beginning to the end, there was trouble all through.
Law Alpha say the 8th Assembly was constantly engulfed in political, engaged with the executive for political relevance. Many lawmakers, outstanding political and intellectual influence, held sway, but frequent and unseasoned face-off made the atmosphere volatile.
Mike Anyako tweets, the 8th National Assembly started on a very good state. They see themselves as senators and representatives of Nigeria and not political parties. They really appreciated the present circumstances in the country and the need to fast-track governance. Some enemies of progress see it as rubber stamping, but they have already failed. We need to see early passage of 2020 budget and development in the critical areas of the economy. Kudos for their support to the executive.
All right, now, Dele Jack Solomon has this tweet. It says, according to Professor Atahiru Jega, who is part of the report that Erike is explaining to us, it's important for the National Assembly to create a database, maintain an updated, open and accessible bills progression chart to enable legislators, legislative aides and other stakeholders track or monitor progress of bills passage. This, the National Assembly must not fail to do.
But Amasi Haruna Adamu tweets, it's engulfed with a face-off between the executive and legislature that affected the development of our nation. But be that as it may, they recorded a tremendous achievement of, as rightly put and recommended by Jay in his recent presentation.
Abdul, 2003, has this tweet. Clashes were the order of those days. Hence, not much was achieved. But it turns out that a great deal was also achieved despite the clashes that they had.
Yes, and Abbas Abubakar Saad tweets, the 8th National Assembly tried particularly in the area of petition, fighting corruption, but unfortunately, the unhealthy relationship that existed between the legislature and the executive in the 8th Assembly is regrettable, forgetting that they are supposed to work towards one goal.
Utulo Sunday, the 8th Assembly disappointed Nigerians in the area of appropriation bill, which held Nigerians hostage for several months.
And Mutana Farouk tweets, I urge the 9th National Assembly to enact laws that would promote the advancement of our economy, but not as detriment of the poor masses. Oversight function on the MDAs should be their utmost priority as the President submits the financial framework for 2020.
Olakunle Sharon tweets, the 8th Assembly would have been the most relevant if there was a harmonious relationship between the executive and the legislature. But unfortunately, there existed as a puzzle full of sharp edges that refused to come together.
And Professor Mojid Alabi tweets, in the 8th House of Representatives, we were so much obsessed with passing the highest number of bills that we sacrificed quality for mere figures. We gave Nigerians what they wanted because they judged us only by numbers. It is spoiled.
All right, this is coming from Prince Vikid. Tweet says that's the State National Assembly, failed in their main official duties of budget appropriation despite the fact that they belong to the same political party and the majority of APC members. They were always at loggerheads. That's why they were unable to make laws that would benefit the masses of Nigeria. But the scientific result doesn't show that from the last comment you made. Right. Those are the tweets that we can accommodate in the meantime.
Yes, the tweets should be short, please, so that we can be able to read all next time.
Next time. That's why I say tweet.
It's a tweet.
Short
and precise.
And sharp.
They say call it KISS. Keep it short and simple in mass communication.
Yeah, that used to be the name of a political party. It was the name of a political party in South Africa. They contested the 1994 first racial elections. Yeah. Their performance was dismal. They went on again to contest in 1999. By 2004, which was 10 years since the advent of majority rule in South Africa, they contested, but after that, I think they seem to have faded off the radar. Dr. Ernest Sereke, of course, your report also, the report of the center also has recommendations. Yes. Very briefly, what are the highlights?
Okay, we recommended that the 9th National Assembly should pay more attention on quality of bills. So we have recommended, even though the Assembly has been doing this, but pre-legislative scrutiny process should be more entrenched in the 9th Assembly.
What does that mean?
Now, what it means is that bills, before they are brought to the floor of the House, should be scrutinized in terms of analyzing the bills. You find out whether there are bills that have taken care of what you are introducing with a new bill. You look at issues of drafting that the executive had concerns with, and there are so many organizations and agencies that are doing that. Of course, the rules and business of the House, of the two chambers, would naturally do this. But as a result of the poor quality of the bills that we have been talking about, there is need for the rules and business to be more active in this. PLAC is also supporting the National Assembly in this regard. The National Institute for Legislative and Democratic Studies is equally doing this. The Yaga Africa Center for Legislative Engagement is equally willing to assist in doing some of this. We also believe that there should be a legislative standards committee that will be like a gateway through which these bills will pass to ensure that bills meet certain standards. And so as far as legislation is concerned, we're making some of those recommendations. In terms of representation, we have suggested that members should try to engage with their constituents, establish constituency offices, and good enough, one of the good things about the 9th Assembly is that it appears to be a listening assembly, because the speaker told us that they have resolved in the House leadership that once in a while in the year, leadership of the assembly will be sent across the country to monitor how members of the House of Representatives are engaging with their constituents, especially with regards to issues of constituency offices, town hall meetings, and other engagements with constituents. And so that recommendation is already recognized and being implemented by the House of Representatives. In the area of executive legislative frosty relationships that we saw in the 8th National Assembly, we have recommended that apart from the formal channels of communication and relationship, the National Assembly and the Executive should explore other informal means. It is good that we are hearing from the two members of the National Assembly that is being explored. If you go to Oyo State, for instance, there is a monthly breakfast meeting between the Executive and the Oyo State House of Assembly. The National Assembly and the Executive at the center can equally explore that option. It helps to reduce, the frosty relationships that they have had in the past. I've also recommended that the leadership of the Assembly should have certain benchmarks, targets that committees should meet, and committees who fail to meet these benchmarks and targets should be sanctioned.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ereke. We're now coming to Senator Ajusabi. From frosty to cordial, how do you build on that?
Well, I think what really happened was, of course, for those who were in the last assembly and who felt the heat, people like us, when the night assembly emerged after the elections, we had to quickly do needful in terms of the issue of how our leadership is going to emerge. Because the cause of the frustrated relationship clearly was the issue of how leadership emerged. So, in all sincerity, we prevailed on many of those who are coming on board, because I think the turnover is always an issue. In the 8th assembly, there were about over 77 people who were new. In this particular one, in the Senate, for example, in this particular, I think it's about 66 or thereabout. So there was an improvement in terms of the number of people who returned. So all of this helped in terms of our engagement, and of course, those who are seeking to lead us engaged each legislature one-on-one. Now, the other point I would like to make is that perhaps we've not had that. The issue of public petitions. I think the last assembly, the Senate in particular, resolved more than 200 public petition issues, which was unprecedented, and it helped so many agencies or even companies or private citizens to actually resolve an issue that will have cost them so much money in the courts. So I thought I should also, put that across.
All right, thank you very much, Honorable. That's your closing thoughts very briefly, going forward.
Well, I think our leaders have already helped stabilize the system, and they're always in contact with the executive. Our majority leaders are also doing quite impressive, because they are the one that liaises with the executive. And more importantly, we members, we are set to support our leaders to achieve what we are targeting. I think it's a good one.
All right. On that note, we'd like to appreciate Honorable Abdulrazak Namdas. He was the spokesman of the House of Representatives and is currently chair of the House Committee on the Army. Honorable Namdas, thank you very much for being with us on Good Morning Nigeria today. We also would like to appreciate Dr. Ernest Ereke, scientist and coordinator of the Center for Legislative Engagement, which is under Yaga Africa, that sponsored the performance evaluation of the 8th National Assembly. Dr. Ernest Ereke, thank you very much for being with us on the program today.
Thank you for having me.
From Benin, we were joined by Dr. Sawaru Okunzua, public affairs analyst. Dr. Okunzua, always a delight having you on Good Morning Nigeria. Last but not the least, we would like to appreciate the spokesman of the Senate, the 8th Senate, and now for the 9th Senate is Deputy Chief Whip, Senator Aliu Sabi Abdullahi.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Distinguished Senator, thank you for being around.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so let's go over down to our sports desk.
Nigeria's senior women's team will miss the Olympic Games for the third in a row after